Hey, it's your old pal Lucid Stew again, and this time we're going to take another look at using logic for sculpting. We talked about this in my 5-minute tree video, but let's check out a couple more ways we can do this. Let's get to it. The first thing we're going to make is some rope, and I want to do that to show how you can use rotation in one axis to create a complex sculpture in a way that is much easier than manually. I'll make a long cylinder as a guide that we can apply our logic to. I'm going to stamp that and then exit sculpture mode. When I'm back in edit mode, I can apply my logic. We're going to add a rotator to give the cylinder a spin and also a mover to make it move along one spatial axis in the scene. I'll surface snap and place the rotator on the top to keep it flat. I'll then alter the rotation so that the rotator is acting on the long axis of the cylinder. This is most easily accomplished with the grid on. Different combinations of rotation speed and mover speed will give different results. I experimented a little and liked the results from 630 degrees per second of rotation and 0.5 meters per second of mover velocity. I will then surface snap and place a mover somewhere near the middle of the cylinder. It doesn't matter if it isn't perfectly straight in the X and Z axes because we're going to be moving the cylinder either up or down. And then I'll go into the mover and set the movement direction. Again, this is most easily accomplished using the grid when moving along the spatial axes. And then I'll set forward speed to the velocity that I want. I'll then go back into the sculpture. Once in sculpture mode, I want to make sure the grid is turned off and surface snap is turned on. I'm going to select smear and then I want to go into the paint mixer to create a custom color scheme. To use the paint mixer, we select a color and then drag it from the pure circle into the mixed circle. For this sculpt, I want some warm light colors, but also some darker grayish colors for contrast and variety. You can get your colors to mix in different ways by placing them into the mixer differently and then giving the result different spins. To spin the mixed paint, grab it with R2 and then quickly drag in a direction and release. It takes some practice. To make a rope shape, we'll choose filled donut and we'll make it thinner for a bumpier surface. Keep in mind we're surface snap, so we want to keep our imp on the cylinder. Give yourself plenty of room so your imp doesn't end up off the screen. Then we will click R3 to start time and activate our logic. When you start time, immediately press and hold R2 to smear the shape. To keep the smear going, you'll need to jostle your imp ever so slightly. This will also result in some nice variation, which will give the end result a more natural look. Your imp will be inclined to go upward with the sculpt, so you'll have to work it downward a bit as the cylinder moves along. Otherwise, you're pretty likely to end up with your imp off screen, and that will make it difficult to see what you're doing. On the resulting spiral, you want to leave enough room to either double the spiral up or give it another go in a second round. The rope piece is sculpted, so we'll delete our guide cylinder and then exit sculpture mode. Back in edit, we will then delete our logic and then go into style mode to make some adjustments. I'll change the fleck type to impressionist and then comb the flecks in the direction of the spiral to give it extra texture. Then I'll go into the sculpture menu and increase the impasto so we can see our fleck a little better. I've shed some light on this situation, and now I want to copy this sculpt to fill in the gaps of the spiral. That's as simple as moving the sculpture up half a notch, but you can also rotate it or move it in more subtle ways to your liking. When we have it in place, we'll adjust the physical properties to get the material more like rope. I like some roughness and a very small amount of metalness for this. And then lastly, I'll change the materials properties, the color, and the ruffle of one of the sculptures so the two aren't identical, and our rope piece is done. Next up, I'm going to use some logic to create a pebble pile for the next Dreams Guild asset collection, which will be available in about 2 weeks, by the way. For this, I will use the default sculpture as a moving table to create more randomness and avoid patterns, which is a big hazard when working with sculptures made of a bunch of small edits, like a pebble pile would be. So I'll take a mover and surface snap that to the default sculpture. I will then do the same with a signal generator, and I will run the output of the signal generator to the input of the mover. This will cause the mover to oscillate back and forth, which will cause the sculpture to oscillate back and forth across a part of the scene. How far it travels in either direction depends on how we set the signal generator. You want to make sure the max values are the same and the min values are the same. You also want to make sure the max and min values are the same as each other, but with one the negative of the other. If you do it any other way, the object will drift, and that's bad if you don't want it to. How much it moves will be a combination of the signal strength and the duration of the sweep. I'm in the default sculpture now, and I'm using a spheroid shaped like a pebble. Surface snapped with the smear tool. Color is some random grays. I'm going to set the pebble spinning by flicking the DS4 touchpad. The faster you can get this spinning, the better. When I click R3 and start time running, our table oscillates, and this will keep us sufficiently random. With one direction of motion taken care of, all you really need to do here is jiggle your imp up and down the screen, and that will give you a good random pattern. You can also switch between pressing D-pad up and D-pad down to randomly increase and decrease the size of your pebbles. I've skipped ahead some here. At some point, for the sake of variety, you'll probably want to change your shape and your color mixer. The whole process for something like this takes about 5 minutes, and 5 minutes of mostly dark grays is pretty dull. When the field starts to fill in, you'll notice areas that are less well covered, and you can concentrate on those more to get more even coverage. You also don't need to worry about being neat, because we'll trim back any excess later on. Just a note here, I felt like the color scheme was pretty dull at this point, so I'm adding a little red and some medium beiges to the mix, which will make it look more realistic. I was looking at some pebbles outside, and grayish blue along with light beiges are fairly common, although I don't add them here. At some point you might feel like you're not getting your bare patches taken care of. At this point you have created plenty of noise, so you can stop your platform and add more shapes without worrying too much about creating obvious patterns. Also, especially if you're planning on syncing this sculpt into something else, there's absolutely nothing wrong with gaps. Actually, they're probably better in most cases. We have good area coverage at this point, so I'm going to stop laying down edits and get rid of the default sculpt shape. I'll then do a rough trim of the edges with a large negative box. After the rough trim, I'll go back around the edges with blend turned up to give the edges a more natural look. I'll adjust my materials property to give the pile some shine, and then I'll turn ruffle all the way up for a more natural surface. Then I'll delete the logic, and that sculpture is done. So in this video we talked about how to use logic as a sculpting aid. Just 2 examples of many possible uses of this idea. I found that when I started thinking in these terms, how to apply this technique comes to mind much more quickly when I'm planning my next sculpture. Another graphics thermo video is coming, but that's all for now. Until next time, I'll see you in the Dreamiverse.